Hi, you're watching Rose Squad Reviews. I'm Melanie. I wanted to take the concept of introducing characters at the beginning of a story and how that relates to how that is done, how that relates to the story moving forward. And so the two examples we're going to be looking at are Harry Potter and Haikyuu. They both start with H, but other than that, they pretty much have nothing in common. I picked Harry Potter mostly because it's a, I'm assuming everyone's heard of Harry Potter at this point, because one of the problems with Harry Potter, at the beginning, you're introduced to so many characters, and some of them, it's kind of overwhelming, and then as you go, subsequent chapters, you're introduced to more and more and more characters, and it's a very large universe. There's lots of characters, which is great, but just back it down a little bit. And so, my theory is that Haikyuu does this, and they do it pretty well. And so we're going to get into that, but first I'm going to tell you exactly how many characters are in the first chapter of Harry Potter. And just for the qualifications for these to be counting is that they have to be introduced by name and or focused on for a good segment of time and or have like actual importance to the plot. So for example, Dedulus Diggle is mentioned in the first chapter of Harry Potter. He is mentioned by name. Is he important to the plot though? Not really. So we're not going to count him. But first off, you have Mr. Dursley, Mrs. Dursley, Dudley, Mrs. Potter / just the Potters in general. I include them because they are in fact important to the plot. Albus Dumbledore, because that's 5. Professor McGonagall, Voldemort, Harry, and then finally Hagrid. So it's about a solid 9 characters all in the span of like 18 pages. Is a lot. And so then, for Haikyuu, the first episode, you're really only introduced to 2, technically 4 characters, which would be Hinata and Kageyama, and then technically Izumin and Koji. I'm not sure whether they would count as like an actual character, because they are introduced by name, we do spend time with them, but they're not really important to the main plot of the story. However, Hinata and Kageyama are quite integral to the main plot of Haikyuu. And then for the sake of fairness, I decided to include the second episode of Haikyuu just to kind of round things out, in which then we're introduced to Daichi, Sugawara, Tanaka, and technically the vice principal. Like, he's there, he's not really important to the plot, and you don't like learn his name, like you don't really need to know anything about him other than that's the vice principal. You know, he's a fairly distinctive character design. It's not like he's just gonna blend into the background. Like some of the other characters, cough cough, we'll get to that in a minute. Also, something that is interesting, in the first episode you do technically meet Daichi, Sugawara, and Tanaka, but all you ever see is like their backs and then like their heads are cut off, but not counting Izumin and Koji and the vice principal, we have Hinata, Kageyama, Daichi, Sugawara, and Tanaka. All 5 characters you are introduced, very integral to the plot, you know their names, etc., as opposed to 9, which is almost twice that amount. And so, I think starting with a smaller cast of characters is very important for people coming in. You don't feel confused. You're not like, okay, this guy was mentioned, I don't remember who he is, what's going on. You know who these people are from the outset, and then from there, the cast can steadily grow and steadily build, including, hopefully, character growth within the characters that you've already met. Now, the cast of Haikyuu is also pretty large, given that there's like at least 6 people on a volleyball team, if not more. But as you can see, the treatment of how the characters are introduced and the pacing of that is quite different. I will say for Haikyuu, since you're starting off with a smaller cast, you kind of do wonder, like, okay, like, are there any other guys that are on the volleyball club? Like, just like tasteless background characters that we don't get any character development on. And so it took me a little while to actually get to know and be able to recognize some of the second years. But also, they aren't as crucial to the plot as Hinata and Kageyama. Another thing about Haikyuu is it is a very character-driven show. It's more character-driven above plot-driven. In the very first episode, in fact, at the beginning of the episode, so you gotta know it's important, Hinata talks about seeing the view from the top and how he can't see it from him just by himself, but if he has a team with him, then maybe he can overcome all these obstacles that are in his way. Throughout the course of the show, the anime is more about the characters growing themselves and improving, and less about them actually winning matches. I mean, do they win? Yeah, for the majority of the time they do win. There are some losses. Spoilers, I won't tell you which ones, but those losses in turn then push on their growth and push them to become better volleyball players and hopefully better people. Not to say that Harry Potter doesn't have this aspect of characters learning through their mistakes, but it is a much less character-driven story. And for that reason, I think it could have been improved on in that way. Don't know if that made sense to you all, but that's what I have. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Let me know what you thought, if you think I'm totally wrong, if you agree with me. Let me know in the comments. And I'll see you next time.